right, well, welcome to traditional next generation firewalls. This is going to be a high-level talk, but we will, oh, I see there's Joe has entered. So Joe, also the same thing to Jaqueen, just if you have any questions, because there's us right now, just pop in and ask them. I will be going off video for this, but again, anytime you have questions, feel free to ask and we'll get done what we can. So this is going to be a high-level talk, how this is designed, but again, ask questions as you need. So the agenda for today is basically we're going to look at what is a firewall, types of firewalls, intrusion detection, intrusion prevention systems, firewall data flow, the next generation firewall architecture, management, licensing. We talk a little bit about Talos, and then we're going to talk about access control policies, and that covers all the access control policies that we'll have from SNORT and that relate to SNORT and the Talos feeds and all that. So we're going to tie all that together for you. So best practices. Then we're going to talk a little bit about multi-instance versus multi-context, high availability and clustering. I know, Jaqueen, you said you do some of those commands, so we'll talk a little bit about that. VPN support, troubleshooting, CTID, and migrations. So, all right. So what is a firewall? So firewall, if we're talking in construction terms, it's a barrier inside a building designed to limit the spread of fire, heat, or structural collapse. So we'd have firewalls, and then you'd have to punch holes in firewalls to allow conduit to go through and so forth. We have the same concept in computing. So it's a technological barrier designed to prevent unauthorized or unwanted communications between computer networks and hosts. And again, the source from that is Wikipedia. So really what we're talking about is a barrier. And what has happened over the course of the years is how much intelligence is being built into this barrier. And that's what we're going to talk about here first. So traditional firewalls. So there's Gen 1 firewalls, and those basically control inbound and outbound network traffic based on predetermined security rules, and typically looked at traffic on a packet-by-packet basis. This would be old firewalls, how we used to do it on routers, when we would kind of have a router act as a firewall, so we would block specific ports or block specific IP addresses, so on. Generation 2, you could actually do more because you could track a connection. So we could start looking at the connections and say we're getting X amount of connections from this IP address going to these port numbers. So we could actually look at that connection and say, all right, maybe this is an attack coming in. They're trying different things. So the key difference between Generation 1 and Generation 2 is the ability to track a connection versus packet by packet. So in Gen 1, there's no knowledge of anything. Packet comes in, it looks at it, says yes or no. Another packet, yes or no. This one we could actually start looking, Gen 2s, we start looking at flows of packets. Okay. Couple terms in here that sometimes are confusing for some people. That's why I put this in here. But we have stateless versus stateful firewalls. So stateless typically look at the source and or destination to determine the threats are present. And they typically only look at the packet header and match against those rules. So the pros of a stateless are very fast performance because it's looking at the header, making determination. It can handle high volumes of traffic, again, because we're really just looking very quickly at that packet header and saying yes or no. And historically less expensive because, again, we don't have to go very deep into it. Now, the very things that make it fast are some of the cons, right? So we don't have traffic inspection. We don't look inside the packet to see if there's issues. Again, we don't examine the entire packet, so we can't see if there's checksum differences or on a packet or 256 hashes. We don't look at any of that. Okay. And it will require a configuration for suitable protection. And what I mean by that is I don't get any intelligence feeds to it. I'm not tracking any of the connections. So basically, this is a reactive piece. I can't use any sort of intelligence to predict future, what would you say, future malicious traffic. Okay, so we always have to, we're constantly building rules in this to make sure it works. Stateful firewalls then. So stateful, they monitor all parts of the traffic stream. They can integrate encrypted tunnels. They identify TCP connection states, so we can look at syncs, we can look at acknowledgements, okay? Look at the different packet states, read all those. You can catch sequence numbers. We look at that entire stream, okay? So we can see if someone's trying to do a sequence number injection or something similar. Okay, so the pros of this, we could look at detect unauthorized attempts at forged messaging, because again, maybe we have a connection and someone starts to try to put in a different sync or guess the TCP sync number to get their own connection stated. We can find that. Okay, the attributes of what we're looking at are stored in memory, so they're a fast lookup, and we can use what we store in memory to apply to different rules. Okay. And high degree of logging capabilities, again, because we can look at all parts of the packet. We can log different parts of what's going on. So we can really get an in-depth look at the traffic that's coming into us, okay? And we can base future decisions on past or present findings. In other words, we can use the history. We can see histories of maybe anomalous behavior and flag that. And if we see a type of history on different connections, again, because we're not looking at it packet by packet, we could say, oh, we detect this same anomaly on a different IP address. That's fine. Let's use it. Okay. Now, the cons of it, we have man-in-the-middle attacks, which is where someone gains control of redirects a session to themselves and then directs it out. We actually do that in next generation firewalls that we'll talk about decryption pieces. Okay, so we can have some vulnerabilities there. Okay. It can be tricked to allow outside connections with simple activations, such as viewing a web page, because again, there's scripts that run in there. We might not necessarily look at those scripts that are running across cross-site scripting that we have in web servers. That may cause some issues for our stateful firewall, okay, to let it through. And you also need to really keep the patches updated to avoid compromises. We'll talk about this, especially in the next generation firewalls. We're getting updates at least every Tuesday and Thursday via Talos for our SNORT rules. So we want to make sure those are always updated, because we've got real-time information of attacks that are happening. If we are out of our patch cycle, we could potentially have a hole in our network. So IDS and IPS. So those are firewalls. Then we have IDS, Intrusion Detection System. Okay, so it's going to monitor a network or system for malicious activity. Okay, and typically we're going to report that stuff to a SIEM, which is Security Information Event Management System. Couple different types of intrusion detection. We have a NIDS, which is a network based, and a HIDS, which is a host based. Okay. And it can look at signatures to find bad patterns such as malware, anomalies in traffic. Again, maybe we have a certain amount of traffic flow from certain hosts, and then all of a sudden that traffic flow doubles. Okay. It can find those anomalies and help us look at it. And we can have reputation-based detection based on reputation scores. And we'll talk about that again in Talos, but we can have critical risk levels, and we can have sites that are deemed risky. But the problem with an intrusion detection system is it's just going to detect and report. So how is that fixed? Well, that's fixed by having an IPS, an intrusion prevention system. So on that, we're going to have, that is where your network security appliance reports and attempts to actually block that activity. Okay. So far we've covered firewalls, Gen 1s, okay, packet by packet. Gen 2s, which are connection oriented. Then we look at IDS, intrusion detection, where we're actually looking, now we're looking at other traffic that's flowing in. And IPS, the ability to try and stop that. Well, that's what leads us to the next generation firewall, or Gen 3s. So we have our traditional firewall. Typically, it's going to be a Gen 2 firewall, but we also can add filtering using application firewall. In other words, we can look at the app ID and we can block HTTP traffic or HTTPS traffic, or we can allow HTTP and block HTTPS because we can actually look at the application ID. So we're looking deep inside that packet to say, what is this? And that's your deep packet inspection. It has built-in IDS, IPS. Now you can turn it off, but that's part of the entire system. Is instead of having a separate IPS, IDS, so we have a firewall that lets the connection go in, then we go into an IDS, IPS, then we go into the network. Now we're handling all those functions within a firewall. Okay. Another thing that we have is the ability to do TLS, SSL encryption, decryption. We're gonna talk a little bit about that. So, you can actually work with your hosts and provide your own certificates. Okay. QoS. So we can limit and we can rate limit users going through our firewalls. Okay. Antivirus inspection. So we can actually do a virus inspection before it hits our endpoints. Okay. So that's kind of cool. And identity management. So we actually can tie this into, in the case of a Cisco, we can tie it into ICE and Threat Grid, and we can use source destination security group tags. We can actually tie it into an Active Directory server. And we could say in this case, we're going to allow Ed, that's me, right? So we'll allow Ed to go to internal web servers, but he can't go to accounting because he likes to look at numbers, right? So we don't have to do that based on IP addresses, which could change. We could do it by SGTs, or we can do it by my name attribute. So whatever system I sign into, that has my identity in it, and that identity is forwarded to our rules. So Cisco firewalls and the types. So again, the traditional, and when we say traditional, these are Gen 2s, but we have our 5500 series, and we have our ASAVs from the version 5 to version 100 series, which is a virtual appliance. In the next generation firewall piece, we have hardware base, which is our 1010 series, 1100 all the way through 9300s. And then I have virtual firewalls that we can run locally on VMware or KVM, or in the cloud, we can run it in AWS Cloud or Azure Cloud. So we have all these different firewall capabilities. Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the architecture of firepower and what goes on. So I said before that an FTD, or next generation firewall, as we call it, is a firewall, but it has IDS, IPS in it also. And this is really what we're showing you here. So the FTD is a unified operating system consisting of two separate engines. There's the Linux engine, which stands for, or Lina engine, sorry, which stands for Linux on ASA. That is basically your ASA commands that have been ported over to a Linux box. Okay. And then that engine runs on the FTD. That is handling things such as my clustering, my high availability, my VPN, my routing, all the functions you would have in the ASA. When I say VPN, I mean as my VPN concentrator or terminator. Okay. Also, the Lina plane is my first point of inspection for traffic that comes in. We're going to show you that in a second. Okay. Then secondly, I have SNORT. Okay. And SNORT is my IDS, IPS, and it'll look at malware, file policies, we have a file policy engine so we can actually compare against the 256 SHA. We have malware. We have lists of malware that we are downloaded. We actually, with SNORT, we have reputation, and we're going to go through all these. We have reputation preprocessors. We have all these different things we can look at and block or allow traffic based on more than just a traditional firewall. So here's kind of an ASA pattern. So I've got my receive packet there. You see at the left, and do I have annotation tools? Oh yeah, I do. Okay. Let's do this. I'm going to terrible drawer, but okay. So we've got our receive packet. So a packet comes in, and this works on a traditional ASA. It comes in, and it goes into a FIFO queue. Okay, first in, first out. So as those packets are being sorted, it says, "Yeah, I've got room for it," and then it's handed to the ingress interface. Now, a couple things happen, and let's go through the flow this way. So at the ingress interface, first of all, is it an existing connection? If it's not, we go through and we look, we run that traffic against the access control list. Okay. And then at that point, is there a match in the state? Yes. Then we, if not, we can drop it. If there is, we go through and we do our stateful inspection where we basically log the flow, log the connection, the acknowledgement, your sequence number, TCP sync, all those things are logged as part of this stateful inspection. Okay. Then we deal with our NAT, send it out the egress interface, look at the layer 3 route, caps at layer 2, and send it. Now up here we have these are optional modules that kind of do like a little bit of application stuff and a little bit of IPS, but we're not really going to talk about those in the ASA context. Okay. Now, if it's an existing connection, let's go back here and erase all what's on the slide. All right. Now I go back here, and so now it's coming in, and I got rid of my pen. Sorry. Now it's coming in here, and it hits the ingress interface. Right, it's still part of the FIFO queue, and we look at it. It says, "Is it an existing connection?" In this case, yes. So what has happened is that first packet that went through of this flow, because this is a stateful firewall, the first packet of this flow went through the permit and the match, and then we went through the stateful inspection process. We log it back as an existing connection. It basically gets a flow ID. So the next packet that comes in, we look at it and it says, okay, is it existing? Well, yes, we've already made a determination. So we go through here, we bypass, and we drop it at the stateful. So why do we don't have to match it against the rule, because it's already been matched against the rule before. Okay. So this here is called my ASP. Okay. In ASA words, and that stands for Accelerated Security Path, because the traffic has already been had a connection. We have a flow. So what's the stateful part doing? Well, what this is doing really now is it's maintaining the sequence numbers, the connection, and looking at saying, okay, great. No, the sequence numbers are not out of sequence. This is all part of the flow. Everything should be good. But I'm not inspecting the traffic anymore, okay? Because I'm bypassing that piece. All right. And then you do that for every existing connection. So that's your ASA. Okay. Now let's take a look at the data flow through a FTD. So I still have. Sorry, I'm looking for my dot. I can't find it. There it is. Okay. So I still have my receive ring. Okay. Not much of this has changed. So we still have this FIFO queue. It goes to the ingress interface. And in this case, is it an existing connection? We're going to say no. So the first thing we do is we unnat it. and we look for an egress interface. So we unnat it and we say, do we have a route to that egress interface? Yes or no. If we do, great, we let it through. If not, we can drop it there. Then we go through what's called the prefilter policy, okay? And I'm going to run this a couple ways so we get it. So the prefilter policy basically looks at some different things we'll talk about and allows the traffic to go through as a fast path, or we don't have the prefilter policy running. We have a default which sends it through the rest of the section. So I'm going to say at this point we're not looking at prefilter policy. We don't have anything there. So now we do the same thing we did in the firewall. We go through the layer 3, layer 4 access control list. What's a little bit different here then is we go through the ACL and then we hand it to the DAQ, which stands for the Data Acquisition Library. I'm going to show you that in a minute. That DAQ then sends it to here, which is our normalizer, and then it'll send it up through these SNORT processes. Now, I'm not going to explain these. You can see SI, IP, SSL Decrypt, SIDNS URL, Identity, Layer 7 ACL. I'm going to talk about all these coming up, but it goes through the SNORT process. Any one of these in the SNORT process can say, yes, it's good, or no, we want to drop it. In the case of it says it's good, whatever we have turned on, it comes back to the DAQ. The DAQ then hands it to the flow updater, which is basically your state table. Then it goes to the ALG, and the ALG tells the interface, yeah, let it go through or block it. Then we go through our NAT, QoS enforce, VPN, so on and so forth. Okay. Now, if it's then once it becomes an existing connection, we have this fast path. Okay, this fast path is different from this fast path. Sorry, this fast path is my ASP. It's my accelerated security path, the same as we have in the ASA engine. Okay, but notice what's different here is that fast path will drop it where? Right at the DAQ. So we still send every packet of that flow through SNORT. And I'll show you that coming up, but that's one of the differences is everything goes through SNORT. There are other firewall vendors out there that don't send everything through their IPS. So they act stateful. So once their IPS, so SNORT here. SNORT here is my IPS. I should say IDS, IPS. Sorry for the terrible writing, but you got it. This is my IDS, IPS. Okay. That's what SNORT is. Some other firewall vendors will just send the first few packets through. Their IDS, IPS module makes a determination, and then they don't send the rest of their packets through this engine. Cisco does with SNORT, and the reason for that is in case someone tries to do an injection attack during that connection, the SNORT can catch it. Okay. Same thing though, every packet goes through, still goes through the flow updater and that. Okay. Now, if we are fast pathing the traffic, oops, that's the pointer, sorry. So now if we're looking at fast path, what we do with fast path is we say it comes in the pre-filter, existing connection, no. Then maybe we want to let from a certain IP address, we say fast path. What the fast path here does is this fast path actually bypasses SNORT completely. And it goes to the flow updater and out. So you're checked maybe an IP address and a port number, says good to go. I don't want to look at any of the traffic inside. Let's fast path it. And by taking it away and not letting SNORT use it, it saves time, saves effort. And let's face it, there's certain traffic we're not going to look at. If we have SSH traffic or secure RTP traffic that I don't have certificates for, I don't want to do the latency in here, I'm not going to worry about it. Let them take care of it. So, okay. All right. So again, the architectural diagram then, here again, we're showing you have this SF tunnel, which is your tunnel between your FMC, which is your management, and this. Okay. And we go through these different control planes. Okay. So the big picture for you here, pretty interesting. Okay, Lina engine. And what's different now is I have multiple instances of Lina in the data path. So where we had one ASA engine, on the ASA, we had, the one engine that would run it. Here we have multiple Lina engines. And I also have multiple SNORT engines. Okay. Packet comes in, the ingress, it's handled by Lina. If the policy that we state dictates so, we can inspect it by having SNORT inspect it. SNORT is only going to return a verdict that says allow or deny. Okay. And then the Lina is going to drop or forward based on that. So let's take a look at a traditional firewall. So I'm looking at a traditional firewall. Here I've got a protocol. We knew port 80 for HTTP, 25 for SMTP, and 23 for Telnet. Okay. So I don't know if any of you have ever done this where you Telnet to port 25. So I used to Telnet to port 25 to check my mail servers and run that. Well, if I've done that, so I've used Telnet, which is an application embedded in my SMTP connection. Well, what is it? Congratulations, right? I'm a hacker, because we've actually used another program to be a Trojan horse inside a program to get connectivity. Okay, so how does a traditional firewall deal with it? They really don't care. They're just like, am I allowing port 25? Yeah. From this IP address? Okay. I'm not looking at what's inside of it. Okay. So we'll show you kind of what's going on with load balancing. Then we'll show you how SNORT deals with it. So inside my FTD, I've got this internet connection coming. I've got my NUMA, and NUMA stands for non-uniform memory architecture, and basically that's your load balancer. Okay, and then I have my multiple instances of Lina. Okay, now what's cool about this is your DAQ is going to initiate the flow to the SNORT instance. So if I've got flow A coming, so I've got my Lina, goes for Lina to the DAQ, and I'm looking at the different tuples, all right, or tuples. And it might say, okay, I'm going to send this to SNORT instance B. Every packet from flow A is going to go through SNORT B, okay? SNORT B will look at it, return the verdict, and come back. Same thing happens with Lina flow B and C, okay? So they're tied up to the SNORT instance, and that's what we're using. Okay. So the matrix for SNORT now. I'm going to show you this. SA is source address, DA is destination address. So I've got source 1, destination 1, source 1, destination 2, so on and so forth. So what SNORT does is it says, okay, I'm looking at all these. And remember, in a traditional ASA, it's a line by line by line by line by line by line. Okay. But what SNORT looks at, goes, okay, so I see I've got source 1, destination 1. I've got multiple source 1s, multiple destination 1s. I'm going to make a rule chain that's going to eliminate all the destination 1s except for 1 and source 1. Then it has application preprocessors. This is SNORT 2.9, which is up through 6.7. 7.0, you get a chance to go to SNORT 3.0, and they don't call them preprocessors anymore. I don't remember the name, but they don't call them that. But in this case, I've got HTTP, Telnet, and SMTP like we had before. What happens is we've loaded these preprocessors that basically have downloaded what the RFC says HTTP should look like, Telnet, and SMTP. So now I've got source address 1, but source address 1 is tied, like we just showed you, to Telnet and SMTP. So at this point, it's looking at SMTP and it's looking at all the packets in the flow, and it's going, wait a minute, there's a connection request coming across here which does not conform to the RFC. In this case, it could flag it and drop the connection unless we specifically allow it, right? So it's actually sending that traffic to the preprocessors, and the preprocessors looking at that going, wait a minute, that's not how this application is supposed to work. Now, again, here we do it for source 2, going to HTTP, destination 1, HTTP and Telnet, for instance, destination 2, HTTP and SMTP. the key behind what SNORT's doing in this is as I add more preprocessors, I don't have to keep building line by line by line. So let's say I added FTP as an application and I wanted to monitor from source one. At that point, I just make another link in the list that says source one also go against FTP. Okay. And every SNORT instance has that. So that's kind of brief architecture. We can spend a lot of time on that, but we'll go with that to get you started. So firepower threat defense, the introduction to this, I've got my Lina ASA plane, which is my layer 2 to layer 4 functionality. Okay. And then I have my layer 7 functionality, which is my firepower. So that's my SNORT stuff. And they tie them all together and you have the firepower threat defense. 2 ways to manage firepower threat defense devices: on box using the FDM, okay, or off box using the management center. And actually there's CDO, we're going to talk about that too. Okay. But management center. So complete management over firewalls, application control, intrusion prevention, URL filtering, advanced malware, all that is gathered by the FMC and pushed down to the FTDs, okay? Hardware models managed between 50 to 750 firewalls, okay? So, and they can handle 30 to 300 million events going through it and map from 50,000 to 600,000 hosts, okay? Virtual, 25 devices we can manage, 10 million events and 50,000 hosts. The Firepower Device Manager is on, is now available 6.5 on all platforms. And that's your on-box manager that manages the firewall individually. Okay. I don't have some of the intelligence feeds and stuff coming into it. And so here's kind of where we're looking at the workaround. CDO, Cisco Defense Orchestrator. So it's a cloud-based management for security policies and devices. CDO will manage both traditional ASAs and they'll manage next generation firewalls. Okay. It does give you templates for consistent policy design and it will optimize rules on your platforms. Okay. And it helps with migrations and upgrades. Okay. However, if I'm using CDO, I cannot use FMCs. So CDOs actually talk with APIs. They talk with APIs to the FDMs. Okay. All right. So FTD licensing. Okay. So we have some different licensing here. We have our base licensing, which is perpetual, threat, malware, URL filtering, FMC virtual licensing, and remote access VPN. Okay. Okay. So base FTD licensing base features allow for switching and routing, NAT, high availability, inter and intra chassis clustering, and multi-instance. The malware is AMP for advanced malware protection. We have a threat license, which is for IDS, IPS, file control filters. Okay. It does our SI, okay, which we'll get from Talos. We'll show you that. SI for URLs, DNS, allows for URL filtering with the URL license, and then AnyConnect remote access VPN. We didn't need all these licensing with the traditional ASA, traditional firewall, because we didn't have all these features. You know, we had base features, that's fine, okay, but we didn't have, you know, we wouldn't look at malware, we wouldn't look at different threats, we didn't have URL filtering, so our licensing has become more complex. Talos then. So what's Talos? Well, Talos is a threat intelligence organization at the core of the Cisco security portfolio. There's 350 plus engineers, or they call them data scientists, and that's what they do all day. They're looking for anomalies in files and network traffic, and running it against known threats or possible unknowns, and they're creating intelligence that will be sent down to us and to our network devices. Okay. So where you can find it is talosintelligence.com. Okay. And there are 7 areas. They look at threat intelligence interdiction, detection research. That's a big one, right? Engineering development, vulnerability research. So you can go out to the Talos site, and if you haven't done it, I'd say it's interesting. Go out there and just look at a list of vulnerabilities, and it gives you maps of where they're finding them, what they're looking at. Okay, and they also have incident response with them. So highly skilled organization. There are other organizations out there too that do this. Talos comes free with your firewall, but there are other organizations, Threat IQ, Alien Vault, and that we will talk about when we talk about CTID. So access control policy components. I like this slide here because this basically shows you what it is. So when we had a traditional firewall, we had a line, block this, another line, allow this, another line, do this, another line, do this. In this case, what we're actually doing is we're building a policy and we have different policies inside that. We're going to cover all these policies. And then we actually have access rules that we can also do. So we have an overriding policy that has these sub policies and rules, okay, that allow us to get much more granular with traffic. So there's 7 actions that we can do with our traffic. So we can allow it, and that's going to allow it to go to SNORT for further processing. We can trust it. Now, trust gets people confused, but what happens in trust is you do send it through SNORT, and it looks at the identity policy, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and the QoS policy. And once those are passed, then it pushes a dynamic ACL that it creates down to the layer 3, layer 4 ACL. Okay, that says you can skip further SNORT inspection. Okay, that's trust. Monitor is a little bit different. So we use monitor to check our logging. But as we use monitor, what happens is, when you go through a line in a firewall, the first line you go through the match, we act on the traffic, and then we move on. Right? But with monitor, we set what's called an alert or an audit, and then we start looking at we still continue to look at the other traffic behind that, okay, the other lines of code. Block, we can block the traffic, of course. Block with reset, you can actually set to reset the connection on both ends. Typically, you don't do that. I mean, you could do that. If you come from a network perspective, as I did, I used to say, yeah, I'll block and reset the connection because I don't have that bandwidth coming across my routers to make a decision. Network people are saying, or security people say, well, wait a minute, let's not reset it, because if we reset it, now the potential attacker knows that they've hit a real device, and they can try to find other ways to compromise it. I'm like, all right, so there it is. Interactive block will bring up an HTTP response page saying you can build your own, or it'll say, this site is unauthorized or whatever. And then we can do the same with a block with a reset. So let's take a look at pre-filter policies. And so again, as we showed you here, right? So pre-filter is up in there. And as we go way back here, there's our pre-filter, right? That's the first thing we hit. So we're going to talk about these in order. Okay. All right. So pre-filter policy, okay, provides early access control called FastPath, which allows us to bypass SNORT. But it also does something cool in that it allows us to look inside tunnel traffic, which a traditional firewall, I can't do that. I look at the outside header, and even if I'm doing even if I'm doing a Gen 2, I'm looking at the header. I'm not looking at the data inside this. What this will actually do was you'll look at the outer header. hand it to SNORT, and then SNORT will look inside and can look at the other headers inside. So, and the actual traffic inside that tunnel traffic. So it's pretty cool. Okay. Security intelligence reputation. This we get a feed from Talos, and we can manually add the IP addresses, or we have a list of IP addresses that come down from Talos that they have said are compromises. So we get that feed every Tuesday and every Thursday. Okay. TLS SSL decryption. Well, one thing, SSL really doesn't exist anymore, but it's still there. We talk about it, but look at SSL 3.0 as TLS 1.0. We are now on TLS starting towards 1.3, which a lot of this will change. But currently in TLS 1.2, we can do some things. We can decrypt the traffic using a known key. So with that, we're going to decrypt communications with the server and the client, because we basically are the man in the middle, and we have the cert. We have the cert, so we can decrypt the traffic. We can do this if we want to protect some of our outbound traffic. We can do a decrypt and re-sign. So we'll re-sign with our own certificate. So we actually act as a proxy. We could do a do not decrypt, which we will then basically inspect on what we can see in the headers. And if they don't have encrypted DNS names, where basically we can look at the headers, and that's about it. Or if we don't want to inspect it, block with reset, or so we can block and reset that TLS connection. SI, security intelligence for DNS URL, will allow you to allow it, block it, or monitor it. And again, it comes from Talos, the URLs. So, and they also come with categories and risks. So you could do a category called adult sites. I usually do a block a auction site, which if I say block auction site, for instance, it's going to block eBay by default, because that's already been characterized in the category, or should be categorized as an auction site. So we don't have to block specific URLs, is what I'm saying. We can, but we also can block them via categories. Identity. Again, identity policies are used to detect the user with the associated connection. Okay. Really, the way that's moving towards is we're talking down here, security group tags. Okay. But if we use active auth here, when HTTP comes in from specific IP addresses, we can limit the number of users that are allowed to do that. And we can pull those usernames from Active Directory. But we're looking right now really at security group tags. So users will be put into groups via PX Grid through ICE, and maybe through Active Directory into ICE. We pull that information across from PX Grid, and we have them just tags. So that tag allows us to make less rules in our firewall. Now, when we say here layer 7 ACL Firewall Preprocessor, this is all my stuff: application visibility control, so on. So we can look at different applications: HTTP, HTTPS, Telnet, FTD, FTP, so on. AVCs, different app IDs. We look at those. Also, we can look at categories via Talos. And in this case, we're showing you here, we could pull a different category for this application that says social media, auction sites, real estate, so on. And again, we can look at specific URLs in there also as part of this application firewall, where we say, okay, we're going to block Facebook, YouTube, and we can manually add our URLs. QoS policy. So the QoS, quality of service, right, is going to rate limit traffic that's allowed or trusted by your ACP. Okay. Again, it does not limit what was FastPath, because FastPath traffic bypasses SNORT. This all happens in SNORT. Okay. We can have multiple. We can have a policy target multiple devices. Okay, but we can only have one QoS policy at a time, and 32 rules max in that. Okay, and you can limit by applications. We can limit upload downloads. So one of the things we had talked to some customers about one time was limiting upload speeds, download speeds through the firewall for remote workers and giving higher upload speeds, download speeds for people who are on the corporate LAN. Okay. And you can all do that with QS policy. The discovery policy is kind of nice. It's going to collect data on network assets. Okay. And it's going to monitor your segments and ports. And so basically anytime a host is going on the network, there are things that it will tell you: OS version, patch levels, all these things that you would get. And we collect that information in the network discovery policy. And so we can better tune our stuff, our intrusion policies, by using firepower recommendations and stuff, so that we said, you know what, maybe we don't have any Linux hosts on our network. So why do we have rules? Why do we have rules in our system that have Linux? We have nothing to do with Linux vulnerabilities. We don't have Linux here. Okay. So by running firepower recommendations, you can see that because it uses the host database. Now you don't have to worry, because if you have Linux hosts that you start putting in there, those are going to populate the host table. Next time you run the recommendations, it's going to say, oh, we have Debian Unix versus maybe Red Hat, right? So it'll say, okay, well, we're going to add rules. We want you to add rules for Debian, but we don't want to add rules for Red Hat. Those, and that's your recommendations. Your file policies controls what and how files are allowed, blocked, or inspected. A couple things: we have static analysis of Microsoft EXE files by using Sparrow. Dynamic analysis, we set it up to Threat Grid. That's our AMP, okay, Advanced Malware Protection. Locally, and we have ClamAV on our FTDs, and that's a local antivirus. And yes, it is a freeware, not freeware is the word I want. Oh, open source. Thank you. It's an open source. But the ClamAV here is updated by Talos continually. So it's open source, but with the backing of not the community, but a team that's dedicated just to looking for those things. Malware policy, again, we can detect files. So we detect and log the file, but we don't do any further inspection. We can block it if we know it has malware, because maybe it didn't match our SHA-256 value, or we see anomalies, we block it. We can send it, if we don't know what it is, we can send it up to the malware cloud, the AMP cloud, to look at. Okay. And we can have some of those information pulled down to us where we can actually inspect the file and block it if it's malware locally. All right. Intrusion rules. So intrusion rules are used by SNORT and updated by Talos via the SRU, which is your SNORT rule update. There are 5 base policies that SNORT has. So balance, security over connectivity, and connectivity over, I should say over, not of security, connectivity over security. No rules active, which you use for troubleshooting maybe, and max detect, which you don't use. In the balanced, so basically it changes, but you can say roughly security over connectivity has roughly 16,000 rules in it it's looking at. Balanced is somewhere around 11,000. And then connectivity over security has about 509 rules or so, depending on what version we're talking about now. So again, all those rules are loaded into memory. I'll get better performance, but I'll be less secure with the less I'm checking. Okay. So your best practices for this, though, we want to block traffic sooner than later. In that case, we're looking at it just the same as we would look at a traditional firewall. Faster I get it off my system, the better. Okay. Place more specific rules at the top. Again, get rid of that traffic as soon as I can. SNORT rules near the bottom. Now, you pay extra for SNORT. but SNORT does take up some processing, and it does, I'm doing deep packet inspection. So you know what? It's going to take some cycles. So if I can handle it without sending it to SNORT, you want to handle that traffic without sending to SNORT. Send to SNORT what you need to send to SNORT. Okay. Be careful in your event logging. So don't log every rule if you don't have to. You can for troubleshooting. Okay. And typically log at the end of the connection. There are some storage limits that we showed you earlier, right? Event limits. On a busy network, you can blow those up. I know customers that are blowing those up. They're blowing their logs up every 6 hours. So many events are logging, and because they're logging a lot of traffic, and so they have to push it off to a SIEM. But once they've done that, then it's hard to retrieve it. So for that, and then rule expansion. So one of the things that happened when I first got into these firewalls, I go, well, I'm used to the line by line firewall and that, and I'm going, oh wow, I could do all these ports and applications, and I could put it all on one line in my GUI, and that is so cool. I might have 20 elements in that GUI. And then when I went and I looked down, and it takes each one of those and it calls them access control elements, and it writes them sequentially. So what ended up happening is I have 100 lines of code for 20 elements. And I'm like, oops, that's rule expansion. So we have to be careful about that. And then recommendations, again, we've talked about that. Your host discovery, associate your operating systems and so forth to find out what applications and protocols we're running. Multi-instance versus multi-context. So multi-instance is only for FTD. It's full management separation, full policy separation. What's different in multi-instance and you might see in multi-context is we actually take the box and we carve out CPU, RAM, and disk space specifically for that instance. And that instance is running in a container, okay? And then we have, again, traffic processing isolation because everybody has their own resource in that container. So in that security module, I can actually run FTD right next to ASA, and I can run different versions of FTD software. Okay, so I have that. Multi-context, again, for the ASA is used to reduce hardware requirements by making a bunch of firewalls into a single unit. Okay, and it will still provide security policies in that, but that's the main difference. On an FTD, high availability and clustering, or FMC also, right? So FMC, we have to have the same hardware, same release, and then no extra licensing. FTD, we have to have the same model, same software, same number and types, and you will have to get a second set of licenses for your base, your threat, your URL, whatever you have on the main. We have to buy that second set of licenses for the backup. There is a license bundle out there you can get. You have to look at HA bundle and talk to your account reps about that if you need. And then clustering. So a lot of times, in the ASA world, we did have clustering. So you had your active firewalls. We can do on the FTD, we can do clustering, and it's keeping, active load balancing, and it's keeping track of the states. Okay. There's also, I didn't talk about it here, but there's an elastic state that you can build where we actually share all the connections. Each individual member of the cluster also has their own connections, so you can scale a lot more connections. VPN support. Again, on my FTD, we have what's called the Road Access VPN. You configure it through a wizard. And on site-to-site, they'll support peer-to-peer, hub and spoke, full mesh. You have two ways of doing site-to-site VPNs. You can FMC controlled FTDs, which basically at that point, the FMC will grab the key. It'll do the key exchange. It'll pick the passwords for you, and it's nice to set up. Or you have an extranet, and that would be if we're going from a FTD that's FMC controlled maybe into an FDM. That would be an extranet. Now, troubleshooting, we have two types of troubleshooting here because, again, in the next generation firewall, we have the Lina plane, which stands for Linux on ASA, and we have the SNORT plane, sorry. So the Lina plane, again, show logging, packet tracer, you can do packet tracer, and we had packet tracer in the ASA, but here you can do it from the GUI and the command line. Show access list, you could do it from the GUI and the command line. And by the way, if I didn't specify from the GUI and the command line, it's only command line, okay? Show ASP drop from the command line, and ASP, right, your accelerated security path, okay? And then we can do capture of those specific drops. Troubleshooting SNORT, which is my detection engine, we have the capture, and these are all done via command line. We have capture dash traffic. That will allow me to capture traffic that's going through the SNORT processes so I can see what's happening. Plus, it will also allow me to capture traffic on my management interface. Okay. System support firewall engine debug. That's traffic that's traversing SNORT. Okay. If I want to look at my SSL, we have the SSL policy debug. Application, again, if I'm looking at my layer 7 apps. Okay. File and malware. Once again, we can, as the SNORT engine is checking the malware, we can do that. Firewall engine dump identity data if we're, again, got the identity going. And the system support trace basically traces it through the system, and we can number those packets also. Another thing we have is Pigtail. So Pigtail is actually really good. So it's an FMC and FTD CLI only tool that displays the content of log files. So I have several log files that we have there, so you can actually look using Pigtail and run and see inside those logs. They're very useful for troubleshooting. There are only 4 options from the main command line, though. You can debug all the user interface, anything that's going on with deployment, and then captive portal. CTID. So CTID is for third party. It's my Cisco Threat Intelligence Director. Remember we said we have Talos? Well, we might also get feeds from, if we don't have just Talos, maybe we have Alien Vault, which is now part of AT&T. Maybe we have to have their feed also, okay? So we would bring the Alien Vault feed into my CTID on the FMC, and that's going to help aggregate intelligence data, let you have granular control your filtering, okay? Additional line of defense against your threats. I don't have to do redeployment of policies, so that's nice. I don't have to redeploy, it just takes and uses it. Okay? And migrations, again, a couple migrations, we can do ASA to ASA. That's fine. We're used to doing that. That's upgrade hardware only. Or then we can do ASA to FTD, and we have tools to help you go from the ASA configuration to the FTD configuration. Throwing this one in here is just kind of showing you the migration path, okay? So FTDs are the way of the future, and here's kind of, if you're running these versions, here's what version you should look at of the FTD. Now, how do I get there for migration? Well, we have the Firepower Migration Tool, which is a desktop tool. So you download the Firepower Migration Tool, and it'll help you move your objects from an ASA to an FTD. Or you can use CDO. CDO has a migration tool in it, has this migration tool or similar to it, or you can actually migrate from CDO itself by building the templates in CDO. So that is a probably quick, quick move towards the traditional versus our FTD.